Hi there, I'm Jamie Teely, and today I will be talking about some of the positives and negative effects that we've had on the environment from a certain program, which is wildlife resources. I would like to say that originally I had intended that there would be videos of animals that I'd videotaped in their natural environment, playing behind each of these slides as I spoke, but I have since lost them, so unfortunately you will have to suffer through these MS Paint monstrosities that I have created. I'll also apologize for the audio quality. I guess in general I'm just a little bit sorry for that. But on that note, let's get started. We really need to focus, to begin with, on what wildlife resources even are when I'm referring to them later on. In the Wildlife Act of 1998, it refers to any backboned animal that can live naturally within Saskatchewan and the products that come from that animal. Notably, this excludes fish and it excludes animals that cannot survive naturally within Saskatchewan, such as, say, a whale or a parrot. But it does include invasive species because they do survive naturally within Saskatchewan. I will be using a bit larger of a definition. I will also include all the animals under the Fisheries Act, which includes fish, crustaceans, mollusks, stuff like that, and arthropods like bees that are of particular economic importance, even though this really doesn't come up too terribly much later on. If you spent much time in Saskatchewan or spoken to people from Saskatchewan, you're probably well aware of the cultural and economic importance that wildlife resources take up. One of the most common ways we use to manage populations are quotas or tags. These are applied to specific zones, and it tells people how many of them can be harvested. These are generally affected by our at-risk designations. These designations are very similar to that which we find in other parts of the world: endangered, extinct, threatened, not threatened, no issue. These kind of designations are fairly commonplace, but they do differ on what species are present on that list from place to place. Saskatchewan tends to disagree with some regions quite a bit. There are plans that we use when a species has already reached unsustainable levels, either too high or too low. Culling does occur, although usually this occurs in plants. We don't do this so much in our wildlife animal resources, but it does occur on occasion, particularly in more local levels. We do have extensive breeding programs for animals that can be bred in captivity. There are several species of fish and birds that are used in this, but very notably, bison make use of this program. When a species has a very, very low natural population, it may be determined that there will be no harvesting quotas, that you cannot harvest any of it. We do also have introduction of predators. This is quite rare, but we do have done it once or twice, which I will talk about a bit later. One of our strongest tools is conservation lands. These are areas that are set aside and specifically designated for certain species to exist in a natural way without being harvested so that their population can increase. Another thing that we do to help manage the population of wildlife resources is by hunting them or harvesting them only in times after they've already reproduced, so that the next generation is not nearly as affected as it might be if we used the same number of tags or the same quota before reproduction had occurred. In the early days of colonialism, many fur-bearing animals, or animals that were even secondarily good for furs, were driven to extinction or to near extinction, and many of them remain threatened to this day. a notable animal that remains threatened to this day, not only due to their fur-bearing nature, but also due to the fact that their habitat has been strongly impacted, is the black-footed ferret. This small mustelid has been reintroduced in very recent years to the prairie colony on the Grasslands National Park. Many of these animals, you will note, particularly bison and caribou, are still very economically important in many regions. The caribou is classified as at risk, which, even though that is the case, I would say that is one of our larger successes, because despite the fact that many people rely on it for food and rely on it for clothing, and its habitat is being rapidly changed, it has still managed to maintain a fairly notable population. So even though it's not the best it could be, I'd say it's definitely far better than it could have been. Birds are some of the worst affected animals by the change from natural prairie to farmland. Grouse, which are economically important, or rather, were much more economically important in Saskatchewan, have been extremely affected. Although they still have well access to their food, grouse have particular mating grounds that they return to every time. This is a major problem when those have been demolished to make room for more fields. That has had a major effect on their population. There are many regions that are devoted to protecting some of these remaining breeding grounds. Particularly, there are several within the Grasslands National Park, which have been increasing their population steadily over the past few years. Wetland birds, on the other hand, are not doing so great. The wetlands have in large part been drained, diverted, or paved over, well, not really paved over, covered up to make room for better agricultural or urban lands, and this has greatly affected their populations. There are a few areas within Saskatchewan, such as the Old Wives Lake Sanctuary, that preserve natural wetland areas for these birds, but they are not doing particularly well at the moment. There's one bird that is of particular note. They are much less affected by habitat loss and more affected by the habitat loss or the habitat change of their prey items. This bird is the burrowing owl. It primarily feeds on various different rodents, gophers, prairie dogs, that sort of thing, and those have been disrupted by our agricultural activities, and that has significantly decreased their population. But due to breeding programs and conservation areas, their population has been steadily increasing as well. And it's not unheard of that you might see one in the wild these days. So I would say that's definitely a sort of a half success at the least, although they're not really as economically important as animals like the grouse were. Aquatic species are very vulnerable to pollution and the invasion of other species. A huge success on Saskatchewan's part is the fact that our lakes and rivers have remained free of the zebra mussel, which many parts of the world have been contaminated by. So that's definitely a big success on our part. One thing that we've done not very well is dealing with eutrophication. Many of the species that would help mitigate the population of algae or of toxins in the water can be affected if there is too much of that particular thing, which reduces the ecosystem's ability to deal with it in the future. These sort of runaway effects can greatly impact the economically productive waters present all over Saskatchewan. A major issue is illegal dumping. Even though Saskatchewan has many laws about where toxic products can be dealt with, many people don't exactly deal with it, or the areas might be poorly planned. For example, within Moose Jaw, we have a river. That river contains fish, but on many occasions as I've been walking by the river, I've noticed it is logged with plastic and it has that oily sheen on the surface, which suggests that an area nearby where toxic waste or oily waste has been stored has washed into the river, or someone has been illegally dumping into it somewhere upriver. And this sort of thing makes the entire area completely unviable for wildlife resources. These fish are inedible to us now, and I would say that is one of the biggest barriers to our aquatic wildlife resources within this province. A big failure on our part there. Amphibians have been affected by many different things, from habitat loss to disease to possibly climate. There's many things that have been affecting them. Toxins through the skin is another one, and we don't know exactly which one is doing what at the time. These creatures, although not usually economically important to themselves, some of them are, but most of them aren't. They do play important roles in ecosystems like wetlands and lakes that do produce very valuable wildlife resources. Even though these are poorly dealt with within Saskatchewan, they aren't really dealt with very well across the world anyways. So even though it's not great, I wouldn't say it's a particular failing on the part of Saskatchewan, more like a particular failing on the part of everyone in understanding what's going on here. If you've lived within Regina for any amount of time, you've probably noticed we have a lot of rabbits right now. But they aren't the only animals that are taking advantage of our new urban environments. Coyotes, rodents like rats and mice, deer, raccoons, pigeons, crows, foxes, among many others, have taken great advantage of our new urban spaces and have vastly changed the way things are working within these areas. Unlike many of the animals I listed, people quite like rabbits. People think rabbits are cute, and that's largely why they've managed to increase so much. They eat mostly the bushes and grasses that we cultivate within our city and have rapidly increased in population because people tend to scare away their predators, such as coyotes in particular. Our university's very own Mark Brigham has suggested 3 courses of action for dealing with this kind of thing. One is to deal with their food source, to protect or remove the bushes that they like to feed on. The second is to introduce more predators, like coyotes. But as I mentioned, people didn't really like coyotes, which is why we're kind of in this problem in the first place. The third is that humans can become the new predator. Although people did not receive that very well, it would be an excellent way to manage the population of rabbits within the city. The predator release program was attempted for pigeons within my town of Moose Jaw, my city of Moose Jaw. It's a city now. Although it is working now, early on in the program, the population of hawks had overshot the population of pigeons, which led to a brief point in time where hawks would occasionally harass humans for food because they were running out of pigeons. Although now it is much better solved. This sort of thing is very new, and I would say that Saskatchewan is managing these sort of urban environments about the same as other places around the world. So that one is some successes, some failures, and a little bit of learning along the way. Here are some pictures that I did manage to find of various different creatures that I was hoping I would be able to have on the slides. But yeah, I'm just really sorry about that. Mark with your own discretion, but thank you at the very least for bearing with me through this, and have a good rest of your day.